Good evening, everybody. Can I just say how great it is to actually have everybody back in here? It's been so touch and go with pandemics and floods. It is really nice to do something with everybody on site. My name's Ruben Kean. I'm the Curator of Contemporary Asian Art here at Quagoma. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on, Karilpa Point, on the shores of the beautiful Maiwa. That is, of course, the Turrbal and Yagara people. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's Perspectives Asia event, Asian Girls Are Going Places. Perspectives Asia series is a program of public seminars designed and promoted by the Griffith Asia Institute at Griffith University and the Australian Centre of Asia Pacific Art, ACAPA, here at the gallery, to explore issues of contemporary culture, politics and society in our region, while fostering public discussion of Australia's relations in the region. Tonight's event takes the form of a conversation between renowned writers Michelle Law and Yen-Rong Wong and Griffith University's Sally Breen. Michelle Law is a writer of print, film and television and theatre, that's a lot, whose credits include the highly acclaimed play Single Asian Female, the SBS web series Homecoming Queens and the book Asian Girls Are Going Places, published by Hardy Grant in 2022 and freshly signed out the front, I believe. Yen-Rong Wong is an arts critic, writer and founding editor of Penciled In magazine. She's a recipient of the Queensland Premier's Young Publishers and Writers Award and is currently working on a number of creative projects, including a satirical novel, a play and a collection of essays. They're joined by Dr. Sally Breen, herself an acclaimed author of The Casuals and Atomic City, an executive director of Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and senior lecturer in creative writing at Griffith University. Our speakers tonight will share and discuss influences, the creative process and identity in writing, as well as what's next in their careers. And following the discussion, Dr. Breen will moderate questions from the audience, and I'll let you know that tonight's discussion is being filmed and will be shared via social media channels. Thank you. Over to Sally.
Thank you, Ruben. Welcome everyone, and thank you to the gallery and Griffith Asia Institute for hosting us, and welcome to our speakers who I have been admiring and following their careers for some time. So this is very exciting for me too. I'm always very into trying to get inside a writer's mind, but we'll see how we go. They're often reclusive creatures and often don't share, but I've already paid them, so they're going to open up tonight. Yen-Rong, I was talking to you outside. We briefly touched on an essay that you wrote for the Griffith Review recently, which is incredibly moving, and I'll come to that a little bit later. But in some of your other work, you have spoken about growing up and being quite reclusive and being a bookish and quite shy person. I wanted to ask you, you said you learnt a lot through books, including some tips on sex from high fantasy novels, which I'd like to know what they were. Was the pathway to writing a logical progression for you from the reading, or was this a more conscious decision for you as an artist?
I don't think it was conscious. I think it's always just been there. So I have a memory of the very first story I ever wrote was a story about Hello Kitty.
The best kind.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember it because we had, do you remember those like art packs that you used to get?
I was looking for one of those the other day.
Yeah, with like all of the little, you get little markers and then little like a pencil sharpener and an eraser in like this big plastic container suitcase thing. And I remember Mum was like, you shouldn't use the marker to write on things because it'll go blunt. And I was like, no, screw that. So then I took the black one and wrote a story about Hello Kitty and her friends. I was about 3 or 4, I think. And that's the first time I ever remember like writing a story. And I wrote through school, through primary school. I remember going to like a writer's camp, but I was also interested in science. I also have a science degree. I was also really interested in science, and I remember going to this writer's camp, and there was this other girl who was there who I thought was really, really good at writing, and she was there too. So I remember thinking, oh, she's going to be a writer when she grows up. I'll go do like other science stuff, but like she'll be a writer, and she's a doctor now, obviously. I've kind of fallen into doing the writing thing.
How did that happen? What was the catalyst?
Lionel Shriver. So I was volunteering in the Brisbane Writers Festival. Yeah,
Right.
no, it's a good story.
I was going to say, in a
Michelle.
good or a bad way?
It's fine. I was volunteering at the Brisbane Writers Festival, and Lionel Shriver did her
The speech.
thing. Did her thing.
The famous one.
Suki Kim was sitting behind me actually, and I was looking at her, and she was like, "What the fuck?" the whole time. And then we became friends after that.
Oh,
But
should we give
anyway.
some
everyone
context?
aware of the famous Lionel Shriver speech? What year was it in the Brisbane Writers Festival? It was about 8 years ago now, maybe?
I can't remember.
Anyway, Lionel gave a very famous speech in which about representation in writing, and I think it sparked a huge conversation in Australia about that. And
Claims she was being silenced.
yeah, she
Anyway.
was being silenced. Yeah.
And Yasmin Abdul-Magid famously
Yes.
walked out of it. So I did not walk out of it, but I was feeling very weird about it. And I lived in Auckland Flower at the time. And so I was like, oh, I feel weird about this. I need to probably write something about it. So I wrote something on my phone on the train home and on the walk home. And I just posted it on my now defunct blog. And I think Yasmin read it and linked it in her Guardian article,
Right.
and that's how it got a lot of traction. And I was like, oh, maybe people do want to read the weird thoughts that are in my head. Maybe they are kind of coherent. So yeah,
Because I think it took you a long time to voice that. I think reading a lot of your work recently, I've felt there was a kind of self-censorship that might have been in play, obviously to do with, as you termed it, different sort of cultural intersections. But you found your voice. And was it a kind of reclamation in that way?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm writing, sorry, the manuscript I'm sort of shopping around working on at the moment is about, sorry for self-promotion.
No, we want to hear about this.
Is about navigating kind of relationships and sex and all of that sort of stuff that we don't really talk about in our families. In our families, maybe not yours, Michelle.
Yeah, that's a whole different kettle of fish burger. We're going to get to that one.
As a young sort of Chinese presenting woman who has grown up here. So, a lot of people have asked about, what if your parents read it? What do you think will happen? And for this work, I kind of don't care. They have, I wasn't able to say a lot of these things to them, and I still probably can't really say a lot of these things to them out loud, whether that be
Okay.
because I don't have the language or because, they just wouldn't understand. So my kind of perspective on it is, if they want to read it, they can read it. If they want to talk to me about it, that's fine. It'll be awkward, but that's fine. But
Next Sunday lunch is going to be weird.
yeah, you assume that we have Sunday lunches.
Well,
though.
sorry. Next banquet, yeah.
Next birthday, Christmas.
Birthday,
thing.
Christmas.
Yeah. I got my tattoo, and I have a lot of other tattoos, but I just cover them up. I just wear a long skirt. But at Christmas time, I was like, I'm not wearing long sleeves. It's summer. I can't be fucked. And basically when I walked in, Mum said in Chinese to me, she said, "Is that drawn on?" And I was like, "Yeah." Yeah. And then she said in English, because my partner was there, he's white. She said in English, "You'll regret it someday." And that was all she said. And I was like, I'll take that.
So you got away okay with that?
Yeah.
Because you wrote
Yeah.
a wonderful piece in Kill Your Darlings about a condition that you have on your shoulder,
Yes.
and that your parents made you hide because they didn't want anyone to see that, or maybe perceive that it was some sort of sickness or...
I think it's just one of those things that, so I want to say as a broad sort of thing, my parents have done, things that I probably don't think they should have done, but as an adult I can see that they were trying their best and they thought that they were doing their best for me. Doesn't mean that the things that they did were odd or weird or maybe sometimes wrong. But they were trying their best, and raising a kid in an environment, in a culture that they're sort of foreign to, trying to navigate so many things that I can't even imagine them having to try to navigate, plus having children. I don't necessarily forgive them for some of the things that they've done, but I do understand why they did the things that they did. And I think the arm thing, basically I have, at about 2 weeks old, I had a strawberry hemangioma, and usually you get them and they're like this big. My sister had one on her back. It basically just means you can see your arteries and stuff under your skin. And they usually fade, but mine is like on my shoulder and a little bit over my back. So it didn't actually, you can still see it actually, it didn't fade. And I think it was just one of those things where my parents were like, that just makes you more different. Swimming classes and all that sort of stuff. You don't want to be more different in addition to looking
what you're already dealing with.
Yeah. So, and that was a thing, but also, conservative Asian parents. So.
Well, I do admire the way that you developed adaptation skills, which were to carry your secret outfits in your bag, that you would go out.
Just a teenager thing though, right?
Yeah. I guess we all had our secret outfits.
Around things, yeah.
I want to ask you, both of you, early on growing up, did you have any novels or writing that you felt represented you, or were you always inverting stuff that you were reading? How did you connect to literature in the first place? Did you feel that you were represented? What were your early influences?
I would say that I was always inverting until I sort of left university. I studied creative writing at QUT in Kelvin Grove, and very much the curriculum was white men. And that, I guess that was indicative as well as the lecturers that I had sort of pushing their own tastes onto their students as well. So it wasn't until I left university and underwent quite a number of years of self-education and learning which writers I actually did like and who I wanted to emulate. Growing up, I mean, I had things like Morris Gleitzman and Paul Jennings, and I loved Enid Blyton as well. So I very much sort of escaped into this absurdist childhood fantasy a lot of the time. I remember reading a lot of books for the MS Readathon, and they were all fairly white in their representation. It wasn't until I read maybe Alice Pong's memoir, Unpolished Gem, when I left school and left university, that I sort of got a taste of what representation looked like, and that was a memoir about growing up in Australia as an Asian Australian woman. I would say the book that most resonated with me, ironically, was written by a long dead English writer named Charlotte Bronte. And that was a copy of Jane Eyre, and that's sort of, the typical story of getting a book recommended by your English teacher and finding myself really seen for the first time. I think that was the first time writing and reading made sense to me, because I'd always seen it as sort of a form of entertainment and a way to pass the time. And I knew that I was good at writing, but I didn't necessarily understand why I was doing it. And I think that was the first book where, it's highly problematic now, so I haven't read it since. Mr. Rochester keeps his POC wife locked up in a tower and she's mad. But at the
plays
time,
a lot of tricks.
it does. At the time, I read it and I was reading about this young woman who was so isolated and friendless and felt so alone in the world, and she found a connection. And I remember devouring that and feeling as if I wasn't alone in the world, and I thought that was really remarkable that someone who had lived centuries ago, who wasn't from a similar cultural background, could speak to me in that way and make me feel a bit more connected.
She was rootless, and but also, Michelle, she was a rebel. So I seem to remember the first time I met you, I was running a writers' festival, which was the bad sister version of the Brisbane Writers' Festival, and it happened at night. In a dark bar. And you came in a flurry of activity, and your reputation preceded you. We hadn't met yet, but I'd heard of you from QUT people, and I booked you sight unseen, and you proceeded to read a poem about a tampon. And,
yes.
Which was quite long. And you read it with such verve, and I thought, wow, look at this girl. So I think you've always been rebellious. Is that a conscious decision to undo and unwrap the Asian woman stereotype, or is it just innate?
I think it's innate, and I think a part of that is because I am so conscious of this stereotype that exists about Asian women, and the fact that we are considered, the stereotype is that we're meek and submissive and sort of inviting of ownership, and I am not that, and I really want to subvert it, and I've always had that in me, and I think I get a lot of that from my mother, who's here tonight.
Oh, is she?
Yeah, she's just in the front row here. And she, I grew up imbued with a sense of real confidence and a real sense of, the world also belongs to you.
Sure. And I want to talk to you both now about, you both write quite regularly about the exoticization of Asian women in the Western imagination. How does that, not so much in your life, but how does that enter into your writing? Is that important to you?
Oh, Jesus.
I know you're doing the book, you're working on the essays.
Yeah, I don't know where to start. It's just, let me think about it, sorry. I think it comes from a place of, again, like Michelle, I'm very not that. But also, if you are, that shouldn't matter. You should be free to do whatever you want in bed or in sex or whatever, without people just assuming that you will play a particular role. And we've seen that play out to fatal consequences, for example, in the US, where that guy shut up, those Asian massage parlors. But there's also, in the research that I've done for the book, there's also things like, men write sort of guides for other men to go to places like Indonesia or, Vietnam or whatever and say, it's real easy to get.
There's subreddits about that as well.
And because they're like, Western women have become too independent. And so that it's too hard to get a woman. So if you go to these places, it'll be really easy. And it's just it's just really frustrating. And in like the obvious sense, but also, you know, these women, maybe this is the only way they have to fund looking after their families, you know, like there's so many layers to it that I think people don't think about. Even people like us who, you know, are obviously shocked by the surface level of it. It's kind of like I think it's a consequence of this sort of like ever revolving news cycle where you read a headline, you're like, oh, that's shit, that's fucked, and then you move on and you don't really think about what is underneath that. So I think the more that I've done the research for that, the more I've come to understand, you know, there's a lot more that people really should know about or think or even think about. Like I don't want to prescribe, you know, you should think this way, but maybe like take a couple minutes out of your day just to be like, oh, there's more to this than just the shock value. But you know, I mean, there's also people in academia who've written papers about, you know, why it's just a preference and like, oh, really? Don't you have better things to do with your life? It's about, I think it's about that, yeah.
That's great, and I'm really looking forward to your book of essays that might dig deeper into some of this, because the whole aspect, of course, also of sex slavery is, a whole other biggest growing crime in the world, and affecting Southeast Asian women particularly. But Michelle, did you want to make a comment at all in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's something I explore a lot in my works in different mediums. So my first play, Single Asian Female, was based on a blog that I used to keep of the same name. And that was it was a series of, I guess, memoir essays about what it was like being a single Asian woman in Australia and how it was re-entering the dating scene after a long-term relationship with a person who was also Asian, and just being confronted by the sexualization of myself. And I think being born and growing up in quite a monocultural region, I grew up on the Sunshine Coast. I noticed from a very young age that I was quite sexualized by white men, and not necessarily, whereas I was sort of derided by boys my own age as something that was quite unattractive.
Right.
And I found that really disturbing. And then as I got older, it really affected my dating life, because I would sort of, you meet someone and it's, you get just comments like, oh, I've never dated an Asian before. And it's sort of like, oh, okay, so that's how you see me, as more of a representation of a monolith of Asian people as opposed to a human being. How fascinating. I will not be seeing you again.
Delete.
But it's something that I'm continuing to explore. I touch on it in my book, Asian Girls Are Going Places. It's a travel guide and a life advice guide for Asian women sort of existing in the contemporary world. And there have absolutely been moments of travel where, I have felt unsafe, or, I've had to take extra precautions in that sense. Also in my play, Top Coat, it'll be on at the Sydney Theatre Company in June, July this year. And it's a body swap comedy about a young Chinese woman who works in a nail salon who swaps bodies with a diversity officer at a broadcasting company. Just having the white character experience the sexualization in living in a Chinese woman's body. It's been a really fun process of unpacking that with the actors.
Yes, I could imagine. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Michelle, about the book Asian Girls Are Going Places, and it does really very well dismantle that kind of Eurocentric, Anglocentric travel guide, which God knows there's enough of those. But the other thing that you spend a lot of time talking about is the function of food in experiencing culture. And you grew up as a kid of restaurateurs. and you seem to have a very unhealthy obsession with snacks.
I am a very
Everywhere
snackish
you go, you have a snack. Do you have a snack?
I think I have a muesli bar in my bag.
But tell us a bit about that, about the way that you, obviously we've all been trapped in our own bubbles, but until recently, but you navigate the world, and part of the way that you experience it and feel it is through the food.
I think food is such a central part of my culture. I'm Chinese, and it's such a central part of living, and it really dictates a lot of the rituals that you have with your family and your friends. And for me, it's just such a essential part of being alive. And so my parents, they both migrated to Australia from Hong Kong, and neither of them was particularly interested in food. I mean, my grandfather on my mother's side was a restaurateur as well, but it wasn't, I don't think it was a particular passion necessarily. It was more a means of survival. And my dad actually wanted to be a visual artist, and he'd gotten a scholarship at a Sydney art school, but was very pragmatic and wanted to have a family and wanted to make money. And he was like, well, let's forget about that. let's just become restaurateurs, and we can communicate and connect with people through food, because that's something that's quite, it overcomes language barriers and cultural barriers. So for me, food is such an intrinsic part of, it's attached to memory, and it's attached to family connection and ritual and culture. And, I always think of that scene from Ratatouille, that Pixar film, where the food critic has a spoonful of ratatouille and he's immediately transported to his childhood kitchen with his mum cooking ratatouille. I think my grandmother passed away a couple of years ago, and my sister and I, we very luckily took a video of her making my favourite dumplings. And so it was something that we can recreate later. And so for me, it's when I go to a different country, to sample their food is so personal and a real way of understanding like who these people are as a community and where they're coming from, and getting a sense of common ground as well. And just experiencing the different flavours of a different culture. I'm really missing that because obviously we haven't really been allowed to travel internationally really. So I really just want to go back to Southeast Asia and just go get street food and just be sitting on plastic stools and just sweating.
Where will you go first?
I've been talking with my boyfriend about so many different places. We'd love to go back to Thailand, Japan. I haven't been to Taiwan yet. I'd like to go to Vietnam. And I think Korea is actually probably the next destination.
Will be the first.
Well, yeah, because my eldest brother, he got married last year, and my sister-in-law's Korean, so they didn't sort of get to do that traditional wedding ceremony over there. So I think that's the next trip.
Well, also you've just released the book, so maybe you'll be on tour at the writers' festivals. That's what I do. Hey, book me.
That's right.
Okay, Yen-Rong, in your recent essay for Griffith Review, you wrote very personally about your experience. Well, it wasn't. You tell me it's in 2019, but so we'll just skip the pandemic bubble. Yeah. I found it such an incredibly moving piece. It's available outside for those of you who haven't read it, because you touched on it earlier about how you're trying to understand your dad and perhaps his methods of punishment, which you found difficult to understand, but he was also ill, and that confluence of you growing up in, I guess, as Michelle said, a monoculture, and your parents, the way that you described the canes that are kept in a particular area, and that you still look to that space in the house when you go there still as a grown woman. I found it incredibly moving. But the final scenes with your father in the car, where you come to that maturation and that understanding of the cultural difference and the forgiveness that you're able to enact. Do you want to talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit?
so I just want to say Ashley Hay, who's not here because her family has COVID, she was my lovely, lovely editor for that piece. And like, if I need any evidence that editors can make a piece, like that's like my prime example. And it was really interesting actually because I wrote the essay. It went through the submission period, and then during that period before she got to it, we had that conversation, me and my dad. So essentially it's about, I was caned as a child. I wasn't, well, not for very long. I was probably between the ages of 6 and 9. I didn't get caned very often because I learned to shut my mouth. And
But your sister did
take
not.
it. My sister did not. I have vivid memories of her saying in Mandarin, "Oh, can we negotiate this? Like, can we talk about it?" Which, yeah. Anyway, in a perverse way, my family finds really funny now, which kind of is, but also, you know, child abuse. So, yeah, like, and my dad was quite ill at the time. He contracted hepatitis B when he was my parents are from Malaysia. When he was in Malaysia, we didn't know anything about it until he had to get a liver transplant, basically, when I was 13 or 14. And he had to go in front of the transplant board to justify why he could get on the list. But he was quite ill for very many years before that, obviously. And so that plus being in a new country, his English isn't as good as my mum's English is. I'm fairly convinced that he still translates everything in his head, and that's why he's like 2 steps slower than my sister and I and my mum when we chat. And so like just a whole bunch of things coming together and trying to raise a family. He was a stay-at-home dad as well because my mum ran her own business, which was quite, I think still is quite rare, stay-at-home dads. I'm not sure about the statistics, but I think especially in Asian families that's not really quite common. And he used to be a land surveyor, so he actually came to UQ to study land surveying. He was very cute about it, actually, because we graduated on the same date, and we also share the same birthday. And so when I graduated for the first time, he was telling everyone, and I was like, they don't care. Like, that's nice, but they want to celebrate with their children. You don't have to tell them, it's fine. And we have, I think, because of the same birthday and because he spent a lot of time with us as children, I think there's like this bond that we do have, my dad and I, that is quite special, but I mean, doesn't take away from the fact that he hit me quite hard as a child. And it's, I don't know, it's just one of those things that has happened, and sometimes I struggle with the fact that, they weren't bad parents. Like, they gave us everything that they possibly could. We got like music lessons and like even things,
you write about
even
that
things
so
we
well.
didn't want. We got
Like violins.
But and I remember them because I started school young as well. I started school when I was 4.5. And I remember him saying, just because you're younger than everyone doesn't mean that you're less capable. And he was very, very supportive at times, but also, because he was ill, he had moments where he couldn't control what was happening to his body and what was happening, I guess, in his life. And that came out when, kids are naughty. I wasn't that naughty as a child, really, but
I can't imagine you were, and I feel
I just read.
I feel as if I mean, I don't know if your dad is here, but I felt a very strong connection to the dad character. Obviously, we forgive our parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he had a massive realization, you know, and he went through a journey.
Yeah, and so he got his liver transplant about over 10 years ago, and he's doing very well now. And you know, after the recovery and everything, he's a stay-at-home dad now still, but not a dad. He's a stay-at-home person.
I think that's called lockdown.
No, even before lockdown, he was just like pottering at home and like planting things. He came from a very, very rural area, so our back garden is now full of plants.
Well, it sounds like he's more at peace.
Yeah, I definitely think, you know, after all of that, he's kind of found his little niche of things that he likes to do, and I think having that time to also reflect on, and I'm just presuming here, but having that time to reflect on what on his life, I guess, maybe, and how he raised us. And he basically said, you know, if I could do it again, you know, we'd go on more holidays and I'd be more chill.
I wouldn't push you as hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be honest, he probably didn't push me personally that hard. It was maybe more my sister, because, you know, there's a lot of sibling things there, but I was quite, because it's a very Asian stereotype, but I was quite good at maths. And I actually do quite like maths. And my sister, her brain just didn't work that way. She worked way harder than me at school, but just didn't pick things up the same way. And so he was like, why not? Why not? And he pushed her quite hard when she was younger. And I know, I talked to my sister after my dad and I had this conversation, and she said, you know, he said something similar to her, which I think meant almost as much to me as it did him saying it to me.
To you.
Because...
Well, we might just, sorry to interrupt you there.
Okay.
I have been given a little signal from the back. And I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask you both some questions. So would anyone like to ask the question? Hayley.
That's okay. No worries.
Timing.
That's okay. No, it was great timing. I would have done the same thing. I would have walked out if someone in my row. Let's see if I can somewhat eloquently put it, because I've got a million thoughts in my brain. First of all, thank you guys for representing Asian women. I think, as you know, representation is so important. And thank you for subverting all those stereotypes so well. There was a lot of deep things that we discussed, so I apologise my question isn't as deep as we've discussed, you know, Asian stereotypes, the Asian family unit, ass whooping. The thing that stood out the most to me is the Hello Kitty art books. I am a nerd for stationery. I'm super obsessed with the minutiae of writing and down to like writing utensils. So my question is, how important to you is your writing utensils? What are you loyal to? What are you stationery
That
wise?
should have been at the top of my list.
What are you obsessed with at the moment? I love me a good fountain pen and
That's fancy.
and
We can
a
talk
pencil
afterwards.
and a pencil. But what are we using? And to our moderator as well. What's our flavour of the month for stationery?
One of my favourite shops is Officeworks. I actually have a pen pal who, it's actually Alice Pong who gave me sort of my first writer's break.
wow.
She's also a writer.
I thought you were going to say Alice Pong was your pen pal.
She is.
Oh my God!
So she and I write letters to each other, and which is really special because she's got 3 kids now, so she sort of does it while they're napping. And she will sort of just use whatever paper is around the house and whatever biro she's got. But I've got little letter writing kits that I've gotten from my siblings for my birthday. I'll often go to Daiso just to buy stickers. I also like washi tape as well, so I'll use that for gift wrapping. I'm pretty home brand about it. I sort of just use like the Bic blue pens. And I love a fountain pen, but I sort of am waiting for a significant point in my life to invest in one.
Well, first book, you know.
Yeah.
First book, fountain
Second
pen.
play.
Oh, true. But yes, I also am a huge stationery nerd, and something I've been looking for for a while. And I've been checking out different Morning Glories to see if they have it, but they don't have it. Is, you know, those squishy pencil cases that had like you'd press a button and a sharpener would whip out. Yeah, I'm still looking for one of those, and I found one on eBay, but it was about $70, so absolutely not.
Oh my gosh. I
Well,
remember,
yes, because you're very tight about minibars. Are you right about that as well?
About the
in your
what, sorry?
book. You're like, never use the minibar, and I'm like, okay.
Yes,
I think I made that mistake.
That's right.
I used to, we'll come back to the fountain pen thing in a bit, but the pencil case thing, I remember when my mum went back to Singapore, there's a department store called Takashimaya, and she would get us pencil cases that were like little suitcase things that you could like carry, and I was like, I need one. And that would be like the special thing that mum would get for us from Singapore. Anyway, fountain pens, yes. I can only do extra fine because extra fine nibs because the other ones are too fat. It's like the 0.38 oh, this is really nerdy now.
So you do you like to write freehand or write in notebooks?
I used to.
Okay, but you
and now
not
I
so much.
don't have the time.
Don't have the time.
I do still have a physical diary, which I have a friend who's like double my age who uses TikTok. I don't have TikTok. I refuse. And he's like, why do you have a physical diary? I'm like, because I'm a grandma. I'm actually a grandma at heart. That's why I use physical diary. But we can talk later about fountain pens.
Yeah.
And
It's
Midori
a
paper.
longer, obsessive
good.
conversation.
Yeah.
Would someone else like to ask a question? Yes, we have one up there.
Thank you. So I'm a bit nervous when I talk in front of the mic, but anyway.
Go for it. Let loose.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. But I was just wondering, because from what I heard, both of you been growing up in Australia. So I'm just curious, like, what do you find? Like, there's going to be some challenges, different challenges between Asian people who actually growing up in their own country and then maybe moving to Western country when they are an adult or they never actually move to Western country at all. So do you find any similarities in the challenges itself? And is there any differences as well? So I'm just curious with that, yeah.
I think a lot of the similarities stem from the fact when someone is looking at you, they can't quite discern what you are, if you're a recent migrant or if you've been here for some time or you're maybe a second or third generation. I think a lot of the similarities come from treatment. I think a lot of the differences come from systemic racism within Asian communities, and there's a lot of hierarchy there, especially, you know, if you're an Australian-born Asian person versus someone who's more recently arrived. I think there can be a lot of internalized racism that Australian-born Asians have just because of the way they've been treated growing up, and so there's a lot of effort to differentiate yourself from someone who's recently arrived. And that's something that I sort of became very aware of as I became an adult. I think I myself internalized a lot of that growing up in Australia, and I would feel quite happy when someone said, oh, you know, you look mixed, or you don't have an accent or something like that. Whereas now if someone says, you look Eurasian, I get really offended. Like, how dare you, I'm fully Chinese. So I think it's something that's, I think, not talked about that much because there's still so much systemic inequality that's faced by recent migrants, especially when it comes to language barriers, especially when it comes to institutionalized racism, when it comes to the visa process as well. So I think that's an ongoing conversation, but I think there would be a lot more unity if those conversations happened across the board between those two communities.
You write very beautifully about an organisation, I think it's called Sound and Gesture.
Shapes and Sounds.
Shapes and Sounds, which is a very specific mental health organisation. Perhaps you can elaborate.
It's I interviewed the founder for my book, just for the health chapter and mental health, and she talks about, I asked her, why specifically did you set up a organisation to address the mental health of Asian people in Australia or Asian people in Western countries? And she said that the challenges faced by those people are really individual, and those, when you go to, say, your doctor or GP for help, you're often treated in a certain way, and you're all...
Or not heard.
Or there aren't many psychologists or mental health professionals out there, I suppose, in the mainstream that have a similar cultural background, and so you can often find yourself talking to someone from the dominant culture who doesn't necessarily understand, you might be speaking about family dynamics or relationship dynamics, and it can be fobbed off, or they can say something, unconsciously offensive or something like that. And so she worked in that sector for a really long time and realised there was a huge need to address mental health issues specific to Asian cultures.
In Australia, which is fascinating, that there was such a gap there. And there was a statistic that you mentioned that I think in America, Asian American women are the most likely to commit suicide, which is very astounding.
Yeah, I think Asami spoke about that. Yeah.
I think there's in that space as well, there's just so many things that are intangible. Like I've tried to explain, I complain about my parents a lot. But I've also tried really hard to explain to my partner, who again is white, like why I keep, like when they say come home and do this, like I do it. Like it's really hard to explain why I do that, and it's not like if you struggle with it yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't articulate it to your white partner.
This idea of like being filial to your family.
Yes.
Like I can say that word, but how that what that actually means in my head is very difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced that themselves. So there's just intangible things like that. Yeah.
There's a difference between looking at it objectively and then experiencing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between theory and practice.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm close to my family. That's, it's different. It's not that. Yeah.
Yes. Are we at time? Are you? Oh, sorry.
Minutes.
I'm very terrible at keeping time. I'm a writer. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, so do you find that other, Chinese or Malaysian people you relate more to who are actually born and brought up in Australia? Do you feel that sense of, shared understanding? I say that because I have noticed that with my son. Earlier I used to have all white friends, and he always felt a little bit, he was a happy kid, but there's always a little difference. We are Hindus, and he would go to his Christian friend and he would come home and say, I'm Christian. And I'm like,
actually not.
But now we have moved into an area where there are many more Indians who speak the same language and all of that, and he kind of finds that shared understanding within that friend circle, simply because, I'm sorry, you're holding it. So yeah, do you feel that way?
I think growing up where I did, I mean, it sounds similar to what your son's experience was, like spending his earlier years in a very sort of white neighborhood. I didn't see any other Asian people besides my family or family friends. And it wasn't until I sort of left school and even moved interstate that I really developed a strong base of friends from all different sorts of Asian cultures. And I sort of felt like I could breathe for the first time. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath for 20, 30 years. And I wonder if your son maybe had a similar experience in that sense. But at the same time, there is a sense of separation. And I think that comes from being an Australian-born Chinese person. I was recently inspecting properties with my partner, who's also Chinese, and we were looking at different neighbourhoods that are quite, they're mostly sort of Asian in population and demographic, and I felt really out of place, and I sort of felt like I came out of it really disturbed because I was like, oh my God, I'm so white. It was really quite a revelation to me. And I didn't feel like I quite fit in there. And so when I think about, my very close friends, they all are Asian born or came to Australia from a very young age. And even my partner as well, I sort of have dated people of all different sorts of races, but I think in a lot of ways I have unconsciously come back to what feels like home.
I think language plays a huge part in it as well. So I wasn't allowed to speak English at home. So my sister and I didn't speak English at home ever. Or if we did, we would be chastised. And so I went to Chinese school and did all of that. And so I have a pretty good hold on Mandarin Chinese. So I can speak it, I can engage in conversation, I could probably write it in a pinch, and I could probably read it and understand it in a pinch. And I think having that connection for me is really, really important. I can't imagine what it would be like not to be able to understand it. And I think being able to do that, translation back and forth as well, it makes me see the world in a different way. And we all know that, language affects the way that we see the world, but even just little things that are funny in translation, I think sometimes make my day. And I think that is maybe straying from the point a little bit.
I think it's a beautiful point that you make.
Yeah.
And it's often the dilemma of someone who might be born here that might go home to Hong Kong, for example, and can't speak the language. There's so much in that, and to have that duality and be able to experience the duality of that is interesting. But of course, all experiences, are valid. And it's such an interesting layering of experience.
Yeah. And I do, just one point that I remembered. I remember going to Japan a couple of years ago, and just walking down the street and being like, oh, I feel really just like at home, even though we spoke a kind of a different language, kanji, I can read it, but we kind of speak a different language, but everyone looks like me, wow.
Yeah.
And it was a revelation and also a bit sad at the same time, where I was like, I'm 20 something and this is the first time I felt like this. And I was like, oh, is this how white people feel all the time at home?
Yeah. I think it's a really unique experience just existing in that in a diaspora, and I imagine your son probably feels the same way, in that you always sort of feel homeless, like spiritually, which is, it can be a double-edged sword. It can be a really beautiful thing because you develop a real sense of empathy and understanding because you belong to a global world. And you are exposed from that from a very young age through your parents and your extended family, but at the same time, it's quite lonely. And I think that's why I connect a lot with other people who are part of diasporas.
Because no matter where they're from.
Yeah, no matter where
Yeah.
they're from, because you all share that commonality and you all have experienced that sense of disconnection.
I think so. Yes.
Could I just very quickly ask, what is it that you would want home to be?
I still have a really strong sense of home in the sense that, like, I see Brisbane as home because most of my family are here. And I didn't move to Brisbane until I came to uni, which was when I was 17 or 18 years old. And I talked to my parents often about, you know, would you want to go back to China or Malaysia or Hong Kong? And they're always like, no. Like, there's nothing really there for us now, you know, beyond our siblings and extended family. You know, we've built a life here and we're accustomed to the culture and the customs, and you know, you're Australian as well, and so that's an extra level of it. So for me, home is really where my family is. Yeah.
But I was just asking, what would you want it to be? What do you want to call it? How would you shape it?
I would, oh gosh, that's a good question. I mean, it sort of sounds like a bit of a utopia, doesn't it?
How can you shape your family?
Yeah. I mean, I guess having my family around me and always feeling a sense of acceptance when I leave the house, because I don't necessarily feel that in any city, I don't think. Because now I live in Sydney and that's, you know, exciting and different as well, but it's not where most of my family is. So I think just the feeling of belonging and the feeling of being invisible, which can be a real privilege.
Yen-Rong, did you want to respond to the question?
Honestly, my first thought was wherever my cats are.
It all goes back to Hello Kitty.
I live alone and I have 3 cats. But I guess I was thinking about the fact that, you know, there's go back to language, in Chinese, like the word for home and house, jia, yeah, they are interchangeable, as in there's a very different word for house, and it's very, very different to the word for like family, but the word for family is also can also be the word for home or house. So when you go, I'm going home, you don't say I'm going back to my house. You say I'm going home or I'm going back to my family, basically, if you translate it that way. And I think I still have sort of a strained relationship with my parents, with my mum especially. But I think it's just, if I were to make a home for myself, it would just be, you know, with the people who love me and appreciate me and, you know, who I love and who I appreciate. And I think definitely that idea of feeling comfortable when you go outside, I think that's really important. And I think you don't necessarily understand how important that is until you experience that sort of discomfort for yourself.
Thank you. It was a brilliant question. Are we at the end? I'm going to thank you so much, guys. I'm going to ask Dara to say some closing comments from Griffith Asia Institute, and obviously to give you some presents, which is even better.
Is it stationery?
Stationery.
It's that pencil case you've been looking for.
And thank you, Sally, so much for your
Yes,
moderation.
thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Guys, please join me in thanking this lovely panel, and Sally, you have been a fantastic moderator. I'm sure, like me, most of you might have, you know, felt moments of, I can relate to that, that happened to me. And yeah, there is so much that they have spoken about. And I think there's a lot of change that needs to be done as well. A while back, I was studying third culture kids, and I can almost see that the experiences that children feel. And my own experience for my son, because I do a lot of things, that typically that I grew up in India, and I saw my parents raising me like that. You don't look at me when I'm talking to you, and they go to school and they're like, looking down, and suddenly the teacher is like, look at me when I'm talking to you. So, simple things like that, it's hard, but I think it is it's a beautiful way, because I think as kids growing up here, they learn the two cultures. And I think something that really resonated with me from both of your speeches was that whole idea of that sense of belonging and going back to family. That's what it is all about. And I think for most of us, and most people from Asia, family and food, of course, are two really important things. So thank you so much for sharing these experiences. And thank you, Sally, again, for a wonderful, wonderful panel discussion. So
Thanks for having us.
So just some gifts from Griffith Asia Institute. And
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Oh, special. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Can you please thank our speakers again? And you guys need to pay me afterwards. Thanks everyone. We'll see you outside.